The day my daughter told me she was in love, she was standing in my kitchen, barefoot on the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself the summer after her mother passed. She was holding a mug of coffee with both hands the way she always did when she was nervous. And she had that look on her face, that particular look that every father of a daughter recognizes immediately. The one that says, "I need you to be happy about this. Please be happy about this." I was happy. Lord knows, I wanted to be happy. Her name is Simone Elaine Whitfield. She was 31 years old that morning, a landscape architect with a small firm downtown, a woman who inherited her mother's laugh and her grandfather's stubbornness in equal measure. She had worked for everything she had, paid her own student loans from Howard University, bought her own car, never once asked me for more than I offered freely. She is, the finest thing I ever had a hand in building. And the man she brought to my kitchen table 3 weeks later was named Darius Antoine Kemp. Before we get into this one, where are you right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches tonight. Now stay with me on this one, because watching someone dig their own grave with their ego, it's a slow process, but the end is worth every single minute. My name is Cornelius Raymond Whitfield. I am 67 years old. I practiced civil and estate law in Columbia, South Carolina for 31 years before retiring. I have an office in my home with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk that belonged to my father, who bought it at an estate sale in 1974 for $40 and told me it would be worth something one day. He was right about that desk. He was right about most things. I think about him often, especially in moments when I need to remember what a man's backbone is supposed to feel like. I live in a 4-bedroom colonial on Woodlands Court in the Forest Acres neighborhood, a house I purchased in 1991, paid off in 2008, and have maintained with the kind of quiet pride that comes from knowing what it cost. The property is worth just under $800,000 today. I also hold a rental portfolio of 6 units across the Midlands, managed through a holding company I established in 2003. My late wife, Patricia Ann Whitfield, handled the books for that company for 12 years before she passed from pancreatic cancer in 2019. She was meticulous, ruthless with a spreadsheet, the most organized woman God ever placed on this earth. I am not remarried, and I do not intend to. I tell you all of this not to impress you. I tell you so you understand exactly what was on the table, exactly what kind of man Darius Kemp sat across from and decided to underestimate. He came to Sunday dinner in late October. Simone had been dating him for 8 months by then, and I had heard the name enough times to know it mattered to her. He arrived 12 minutes late, which I noted without comment. He was wearing a camel hair blazer over a white linen shirt, not inappropriate, but chosen, I suspected, for maximum impression rather than genuine style. He had the kind of good looks that men develop a dangerous relationship with: sharp jaw, tall frame, a smile that arrived just a half second before it needed to. The kind of smile that practiced in mirrors. He shook my hand firmly, called me sir twice in the first 90 seconds, which is either genuine respect or a performance of it. I have spent 31 years in courtrooms reading people. I reserved my judgment. I offered him sweet tea and asked him about his work. He explained, a strategic development consultant. He had clients in real estate, hospitality, and emerging markets in the Southeast. He had an office on Main Street. He was working on several significant deals that he couldn't discuss in detail because of NDAs. He had attended Clemson for 2 years before pivoting to the private sector. He said the word pivoting the way people do when they want the word dropping out to sound like a boardroom decision. I asked him which clients he could name publicly. He named 2 companies I had never heard of and one that I recognized, a mid-size hotel renovation firm out of Charlotte that had been in and out of Chapter 11 proceedings I filed that away. Simone watched me the whole dinner. Not nervously, exactly, but carefully. She knew her father. She knew I was listening to everything, including the parts that weren't being said. After dinner, when Simone went to the kitchen to cut the pound cake Patricia used to make, a recipe Simone had mastered over 3 patient years of practice, Darius leaned back in his chair and looked around my dining room with the particular ease of a man taking inventory. "This is a beautiful home, Mr. Whitfield," he said. "You've done really well for yourself." I thanked him. "Simone tells me you're retired now," he continued. "Must be nice, all that time. All that freedom." There was something in the way he said the word freedom that I didn't care for. A faint suggestion that retirement and irrelevance were neighboring zip codes. "I stay busy," I said. "Oh, I'm sure." He nodded, still looking at the room. "A man like you probably built a nice nest egg. Realistic, I hear. Smart. Old school, but smart. Old school." He said it the way someone might call a rotary phone. Charming. I looked at him across my father's table, and I smiled, and I let it go. That night. The engagement came in January. Simone was incandescent with it. She came to the house on a Thursday evening with the ring already on her finger, and she stood in my foyer and held her hand up in the lamplight, and her face was the face of a woman who believed, completely and without reservation, that she was about to build something wonderful. I held her hand. I looked at the ring. I hugged her for a long time, and I told her I was happy because I was also something else. But I was genuinely, deeply happy for the part of her that deserved joy. The wedding was set for the second Saturday in June, 6 months away. Simone wanted it at Seabrook Island. Outdoor ceremony, tented reception, 200 guests. She had a vision board. She had a spreadsheet. She was her mother's daughter. Darius, for his part, immediately began talking about the wedding budget with a fluency that surprised me. He had opinions about vendors. He had connections with a catering company. He suggested gently that they consolidate their finances early, before the wedding, to streamline the planning process. He used the phrase financial synergy at a family dinner, which caused my sister, Odessa, to look at me across the table with the expression of a woman who has lived 70 years and recognizes a hustle when she hears one. I kept my counsel. I watched. I paid for the venue deposit, $240,000 for the full Seabrook package, which Simone protested and I insisted on because that is what fathers do. I wrote the check from my personal account, and I felt nothing but gratitude that I could do it. What I did not do was add Darius Kemp's name to anything. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was dealing with. That clarity came on a Wednesday night in February. Tax season. I was at my desk going through the annual review of Simone's trust, a revocable trust Patricia and I had established for her in 2004. Funded with a combination of investment accounts and a life insurance payout that had come through the year her mother passed. The trust held approximately $340,000 in diversified assets. It had a trustee, me, and a successor trustee clause that named Simone as her own trustee upon her 35th birthday or upon my death, whichever came first. Routine review. I do it every February. I pulled the correspondence file, and inside it, filed behind the 2022 tax documents, as if it belonged there, as if it had always been there, was a document I had never seen. It was a durable power of attorney, signed by Simone Elaine Whitfield, dated November 14th of the previous year, 3 weeks after that first Sunday dinner. The document granted Darius Antoine Kemp the authority to act on Simone's behalf in all financial matters, including, and the language here was precise, practiced, unmistakably drafted by someone who knew what they were doing, the authority to make decisions regarding trust assets, to authorize distributions, and to act as her representative in transactions involving real property held in her name or in her name as a trust beneficiary. I read it twice. Then I took my glasses off and set them on the desk. And I sat in the silence of my father's office for a long time. The document was notarized. The notary seal was from a UPS store on Two Notch Road. The signature was Simone's. I know my daughter's handwriting the way I know my own name. She had signed it. She had done this. Whether she had understood what she was signing, I could not yet say. But Darius Kemp had been in this family for 3 weeks when he sat her down and put a pen in her hand. 3 weeks. I didn't want to be right. Lord knows. I wanted to be wrong. I put my glasses back on. I opened my laptop, and I went to work. By the next morning, I had done enough preliminary research to understand the shape of what I was looking at. Darius Antoine Kemp, 44 years old, had a history that his camel hair blazer was working very hard to cover. A civil judgment in Greenville County from 2017. A former business partner who had sued him for misappropriation of partnership funds settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. A dissolved LLC in Georgia, registered in 2019, that listed him as the sole managing member and had filed no tax returns for the 2 years it was active before disappearing. A foreclosure on a condo in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood in 2020, which he had apparently vacated 18 months before the bank caught up with the paperwork. And the name, Angela Renee Fortson of Decatur, Georgia, who appeared in a 2018 court filing as a plaintiff in a domestic dispute that involved, among other things, allegations that her then-boyfriend had transferred $28,000 from a joint account into a personal account the week before she ended the relationship. None of this was secret. All of it was public record. All of it was findable by anyone who knew where to look and cared enough to do so. Darius had counted on Simone not knowing where to look. And he had counted on me being too old, too retired, too old school to bother. I called my attorney, Wendell Jerome Okafor, at 7:30 in the morning. Wendell had been my colleague for 20 years before I retired, and he was now one of the sharper estate litigators in the state of South Carolina. I told him I needed a quiet conversation. No paper trail yet, just a professional consultation between two old friends. He came to my house that afternoon. I showed him the power of attorney. I showed him my research. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, reading slowly, and when he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient when the news is not good, but the patient already knows. "Cornelius," he said, "this POA, as written, gives him significant reach into Simone's position in the trust." "I know," I said. "Has he used it?" "Not yet." The trust requires trustee authorization for any distribution. That's me. But he may not fully understand the structure. Or he may be planning to wait until after the wedding when he can apply pressure from inside the marriage. Wendell was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" "I want to know everything," I said. "And then I want to be ready. But I don't want Simone to know yet. Not until I have the full picture. She signed this document. She made a choice. I need to understand how much of that choice was freely made before I put it in front of her." That was the hardest sentence I had ever said out loud in that kitchen. Harder than the morning I told her her mother was gone. Because at least that morning, I was only delivering grief. This morning, I was protecting my child from someone she loved, and I wasn't ready to break that love without being absolutely certain I was right. So I made my decision. I would play the game. I would smile. I would be the gracious father of the bride. I would let Darius Kemp believe that he was sitting comfortably in the warmth of a wealthy, trusting old man's approval. And while he sat there warming himself, I would quietly remove every piece of kindling from the fireplace. The weeks that followed were, in some ways, the most difficult of my life. Not because of what I was doing. The work itself was familiar. Research, documentation, legal strategy. That was 31 years of muscle memory. The difficulty was sitting across from Darius at family dinners and watching him perform. Watching him charm Simone's cousins. Watching him compliment Odessa's cooking and ask her questions about the family with the practiced warmth of a man who understood that aunts are gatekeepers. Watching him call me Mr. Whitfield with such consistent deference that, if I hadn't known what I knew, I might have eventually softened. One evening in March, he and I were alone in the living room while Simone was on the phone with her wedding planner. He was looking at the photographs on my mantelpiece. Patricia, Simone as a child. A photo of me and my law school classmates at our graduation from the University of South Carolina in 1982. He picked up that graduation photo and studied it. "Must have been something," he said, "being one of the only black men in that room." "There were 11 of us," I said, "out of 212. Still." He set the photo down. "You had to work twice as hard just to be seen as half as capable. That whole generation did. It's different now." He said it with a generosity that was meant to sound like respect but landed closer to condescension. The suggestion, buried just beneath the surface, was that what my generation had built through discipline and sacrifice was a product of its time, valuable in context, perhaps, but not quite applicable to the present. I looked at him for a moment. "The math hasn't changed much," I said quietly. "The work is still the work." He smiled and nodded as though I'd said something wise but slightly out of date. Meanwhile, Wendell and I had been building our case with the patience and precision of men who understood that timing was everything. By mid-March, we had confirmed that Darius had attempted to use the power of attorney once, in February, at a financial institution where Simone held a secondary investment account. The attempt had been flagged internally by the bank's compliance department, not because it was illegal on its face, but because the account in question had an additional verification requirement that Darius had not known about. The transaction had stalled. He had not tried again, but he had tried. That changed the calculus. It moved this from preparation to active intent. Wendell filed a quiet motion in Richland County Probate Court, a protective petition citing evidence of undue influence and potential financial exploitation of a trust beneficiary. Under South Carolina law, a trustee has both the right and the obligation to take protective action when there is documented reason to believe a beneficiary is being manipulated in ways that threaten the integrity of a trust instrument. The petition was filed under seal. It was not served. It was not yet in order. It was, for the moment, a loaded chamber. We also contacted the notary whose seal appeared on the power of attorney. She confirmed that she had notarized the document at the UPS store. She confirmed that Darius had brought it in, already prepared, with Simone present. She said Simone had seemed a little quiet, but had signed without protest. She had not asked any questions because that was not her job. She said this with the slight defensiveness of someone who suspects, in retrospect, that it perhaps should have been. The next layer came from a former associate of Darius's, a man named Terrence Booker, who had been one of the Greenville plaintiffs from 2017. Wendell tracked him down through court records. Terrence was 53 now, ran a small contracting business, and was not difficult to find. He was also, it turned out, not particularly reluctant to speak. Darius finds somebody with something. Terrence told Wendell over the phone, a call that Wendell documented in a memo that now sat in my desk drawer. A widow, an older couple, somebody going through a transition. He comes in warm, charming, full of ideas. Gets close fast. Then he starts moving paper. He's patient. That's the thing people don't understand about him. He's patient. By the time you realize what happened, the paper's already moved. I sat with that for a long evening. He's patient. So was I. April arrived. The wedding was 10 weeks out. Darius had taken to stopping by the house on Saturday mornings. ostensibly to discuss wedding logistics. He would sit at my kitchen table with a legal pad, always a legal pad, which I found either ironic or appropriate, and talk about vendor contracts, seating arrangements, the rehearsal dinner venue. He was attentive. He was organized. He asked my opinion on things. He called me Mr. Whitfield, and sometimes, when he was feeling comfortable, Sir, and occasionally, just occasionally, Cornelius, with a warmth that was clearly meant to signal closeness, acceptance, family. I poured his coffee. I engaged with his questions. I offered my opinions on the rehearsal dinner venue. And every Saturday evening, after he left, I sat at my desk and reviewed the growing file. By the end of April, the file contained the original power of attorney, the failed transaction attempt documentation provided by the bank's compliance officer via formal request from Wendell's office, Terrence Booker's sworn statement, the court records from Greenville and Georgia, the foreclosure documentation from Atlanta, and a detailed financial profile prepared by a forensic accountant Wendell had retained, a woman named Dr. Phyllis Grant, who had testified in 17 estate fraud cases in the Carolinas and whose opinion on the structure of the POA relative to the trust was, in her professional assessment, consistent with deliberate financial predation. I did not enjoy reading that phrase, but I kept it. I kept all of it. One Thursday afternoon in early May, I asked Simone to meet me for lunch at our usual place, a restaurant called Motor Supply Co. Bistro on Gervais Street, where Patricia and I used to take her on her birthdays. I ordered the same thing I always ordered. I asked about the wedding details. I listened to her talk about the florist and the music and the dress, which she had found in Charleston and which she described with a specific reverence. That told me she had stood in that dressing room and seen herself completely happy. And then I looked at my daughter across the table and I said, Simone, are you happy? Not with the wedding. With him. In the quiet, ordinary days. Are you happy? She held her coffee mug with both hands, same as always, and she thought about it with a seriousness I appreciated. I am, Daddy, she said. He's not perfect, but he makes me feel like someone is in my corner. Good, I said. That's what matters. I said nothing else. I drove home. I went to my office. I sat down in my chair. And for the first time since February, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of what was about to happen. Because she was happy. She genuinely believed he was in her corner. And in 30 days, I was going to have to show her, in front of 200 people, that the man in her corner had been quietly measuring the room for months. That night, I went to Patricia's side of the closet. I still keep her things. 3 years later, because some habits are not about practicality, and I stood there for a while with my hand on the sleeve of her favorite Sunday coat, navy blue wool. She wore it to every Easter service for the last decade of her life. I talked to her the way I sometimes do in that closet. I said, Trish, I need you to understand that I am doing this carefully. I am not doing this out of anger. I am doing this because this is what protecting her looks like, even when it hurts her first. I don't know if she heard me, but I felt better for saying it. The wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday in June. Ceremony at 4 o'clock. Reception to follow under the tent on the lawn facing the water. 212 guests, a number that had grown from 200 in the way that wedding guest lists always do, and a number that, as Odessa pointed out at Easter, was a whole lot of witnesses. She didn't know yet how right she was. Darius was, in the final weeks before the wedding, in full performance mode. He was everywhere. The rehearsal dinner planning meeting at the club, the final vendor walkthrough at Seabrook, the tuxedo fitting that he apparently treated as a social event, inviting 3 friends whose names I had not heard before and whom Simone seemed to know only slightly. He was buying rounds. He was making toasts. He was already acting like a man who had arrived somewhere important. At the rehearsal dinner walkthrough, which I attended as the host, given that I was paying for it. He made a point of standing at the head of the long table in the private dining room of the Capital City Club and describing the vision for the evening with the confidence of a man who had hosted events here his entire life. He had not. I have been a member of this club for 22 years. The Mater D knows my name, my usual table, and how I take my coffee. Darius had been here twice. I want the evening to feel like an arrival, he said, sweeping his hand across the room. Not just a dinner, an arrival. This is where the Kemp Whitfield family begins. One of the coordinators wrote something on her clipboard. Simone squeezed his arm. I stood near the window and looked out at the street and kept my face arranged in something resembling pleasant attention. The Kemp Whitfield family. He had said it with such ownership, as though he were the one who had built the name. That night, I gave Darius his last chance. It was after the walk-through, when the coordinator had left and Simone had stepped away to speak with the club manager about a dietary accommodation for a guest. Darius and I were standing near the bar, two men in a room that was about to become significant to both of our lives, though for very different reasons. I turned to him. I kept my voice even, my posture relaxed, my expression exactly as it had been all evening. Darius, I said, before the week gets away from both of us, is there anything we need to clear up? Anything between us that hasn't been said? He looked at me. He was good. I will give him that. His face registered nothing but mild, comfortable warmth. No, sir, he said. I think we're good. I appreciate everything you've done for this wedding. I know it's been a lot, and I want you to know that I'm going to take care of her. I know you mean that, I said. He nodded, satisfied. He reached out and put a hand briefly on my shoulder, a gesture of affection, of assumed closeness, of a man who believed the negotiation was over and he had won. We're going to be good, Mr. Whitfield. Family. I looked at him for one moment longer than was necessary. Family, I said. The door of mercy closed so quietly that he never heard it. The Friday night before the wedding, I was at my desk until 11:30. I had spent the day in Wendell's office, finalizing everything. The protective petition we had filed in February had been converted, upon Wendell's motion and the probate court judge's review of our complete evidentiary file, into a formal court order, a temporary injunction, on grounds of documented undue influence and evidence of fraudulent intent, restraining Darius Antoine Kemp from taking any action pursuant to the power of attorney, and furthermore restraining the consummation of any legal or financial union that would provide him access to Simone's trust assets pending a full hearing. The order also, at Wendell's precise and careful drafting, included a provision that applied to the marriage ceremony itself, specifically that under South Carolina Code Section 201385, where a court has issued a protective order citing documented evidence of financial predation in connection with a forthcoming marriage, a court officer may be present at the ceremony to serve notice if the officiant does not receive and read the order prior to the ceremony. Wendell had arranged for the order to be hand-delivered to the officiant, Reverend Marcus Elijah Grayson, a pastor from our church whom Simone had known for 15 years, on Friday afternoon. He had also arranged for a Richland County court officer to be present at the ceremony, standing quietly among the back row of guests. In the event that the order needed to be formally served in the room, Reverend Grayson called me Friday evening. He was a man of considerable dignity and very few unnecessary words. He said, "Cornelius, I have read the order. I have read the supporting documentation that Attorney Okafor provided. I understand what is being asked of me, and I understand why." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know that I will handle this with the full gravity that God and the law require." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "How is Simone?" "She doesn't know yet," I said. Another silence. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly, not as exclamation, as prayer. I thanked him again and set the phone down. I looked around my office, at my father's desk, at the bookshelves full of case reporters and legal texts that had not moved in 5 years, at the framed photograph on the corner of the desk, Patricia and Simone and me at Simone's Howard graduation, 2014, all three of us squinting into the June sun, all three of us grinning the way people grin when they know they have done something real. I had spent 4 months building this. 4 months of silence and patience and documents and phone calls and the particular exhaustion that comes from protecting someone who doesn't yet know they need protecting. 4 months of sitting at tables with a man who looked at my life's work and saw a resource to be harvested and smiling at him and pouring his coffee and letting him believe. Tomorrow, he would stand at that altar on Seabrook Island. He would smooth his jacket and smile at the 200 people who had come to watch him marry into this family. He would believe, completely and without doubt, that he had already won. He had never been more wrong in his life. Let me ask you something, because this is the part I still think about. If somebody smiled in your face for months, sat at your table, called you sir, all while moving paper behind your back, would you have confronted them quietly alone behind a closed door? Or would you have let the whole room see exactly who they were? Tell me in the comments, because it's a question worth sitting with. I went to bed at midnight. I slept better than I had in months. The tempest was built. The eye was still. And in the morning, the wind would begin. The morning of the second Saturday in June arrived the way June mornings arrive on the South Carolina coast, slowly, with the kind of gold light that makes everything look like it was painted rather than lived in. I was up before 5. I made coffee, stood on the back porch in my robe, and listened to the neighborhood wake up around me. A mockingbird in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. A car pulling out 2 houses down. The distant sound of a lawn service starting up somewhere on the next block. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that did not yet know what was going to happen at 4 o'clock that afternoon on Seabrook Island. I showered. I shaved carefully, the way my father taught me. Slow strokes, no rushing, because a man who cannot take his time in the small things will not take his time in the large ones. I put on the suit I had selected 3 weeks earlier, a charcoal wool blend, custom fitted at the same tailor on Assembly Street I had used for 20 years. White shirt, silver tie. The cufflinks Patricia had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary. Heavy square links in brushed, platinum engraved with my initials on one face and hers on the other. I had not worn them since her funeral. I put them on this morning because I wanted her with me. Because what I was about to do, I was doing for the daughter she raised. And I wanted Patricia Ann Whitfield's name in the room. I ate breakfast alone. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice. I read the paper. I checked my phone once. A text from Wendell at 6:47. All in order. Officer confirmed. Reverend confirmed. I'll be there by 2. I set the phone face down on the table and finished my eggs. Odessa arrived at my house at 9 to ride down together. She came in through the back door the way she always does, poured herself coffee without asking, sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. My sister is 70 years old. She taught high school English in Richland County for 34 years. She has the bearing of a woman who has spent a lifetime standing in front of rooms full of people who were not yet ready to hear what she had to say and saying it anyway. You ready? She asked. Yes, I said. Simone know yet? No. Odessa wrapped both hands around her mug and looked out the kitchen window. That child is going to be devastated. Yes, I said. She is. And then she's going to be all right. Yes, I said. She is. Odessa nodded once. All right then. She drank her coffee. She did not say anything else about it. That is the particular grace of a woman who has loved you your whole life. She knows when the conversation is over and the work has begun. We arrived at Seabrook Island at 1:30. The venue was already alive. Florists arranging the last of the white garden roses along the ceremony aisle. The catering team moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who do this every weekend and still manage to make it look effortless. The tent on the lawn was dressed beautifully. Round tables with ivory linens and low centerpieces of eucalyptus and hydrangea. Candles not yet lit but waiting. The chairs for the ceremony were set in curved rows facing the water, and the late afternoon light, when it came, would fall exactly the way Simone had imagined it. I knew this because she had shown me the photographs of what it would look like, and she had been right about every detail. She had always had her mother's eye for beauty. Wendell found me near the venue entrance at 2:15. He was in a navy suit, a folded pocket square, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires, the way old friends do when words are insufficient. He confirmed quietly that the court officer, a woman named Deputy Sandra Covington, plainclothes, Richland County Sheriff's Office, was present and seated in the second-to-last row on the groom's side. He confirmed that Reverend Grayson had the order in his inside breast pocket. He confirmed that the original certified copy was in his own jacket pocket, along with a second certified copy for the record. "How are you?" Wendell asked. "Clear," I said. And I was. Whatever grief was going to come, it would come later. Right now, I was clear. Darius arrived at 2:30 with his groomsmen. 3 men I had met once at the rehearsal dinner, whose names I knew from the documentation Wendell had assembled on Darius's background. None of them knew what was in Reverend Grayson's breast pocket. None of them knew that the quiet woman in the second-to-last row was anything other than a late-arriving guest. Darius moved through the venue with the energy of a man at the peak of his own story, greeting vendors, shaking hands, accepting compliments on his tuxedo with the easy confidence of someone who had convinced himself that all of this had been earned. He found me near the edge of the tent and embraced me, a full embrace, both arms, the kind that says we are family now. I returned it. I patted his back twice. "Big day," he said, pulling back. His eyes were bright. His smile was the best version of the one that had been practicing in mirrors. "It is," I said. "Thank you, Cornelius, for all of this." "For everything?" He gestured broadly at the venue, at the flowers, at the water behind us, as though he were gesturing at a gift he was about to receive. "I know how much this cost you, and I want you to know I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it was worth it." I looked at him. The afternoon light caught the water behind him and made everything golden. "I know you believe that," I said. I went to find Simone. She was in the bridal suite, a converted cottage near the main building, surrounded by her bridesmaids and her cousin Tracy, who was serving as maid of honor and who had been Simone's best friend since the 3rd grade. When I knocked and stepped inside, the room went briefly quiet with the particular tenderness of women who understand that a father has just entered a sacred space. Simone was standing near the window in her dress. I will not spend long describing it because it belongs to her, that image, and some things a father keeps. I will say only that she was wearing her mother's pearl earrings, the ones Patricia wore on our wedding day, and that when she turned and saw me, her face opened with a joy that was so pure and so uncomplicated that it took everything I had to hold my composure. I crossed the room. I took both her hands. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. "Daddy," she said softly, "don't you cry." "I'm not crying," I said. I was not crying. I was something else entirely, something for which there is not a clean word. Proud and broken and resolute and devastated and sure, all at once, the way only a parent can be. I held her hands and I said, "You look exactly like your mother." She squeezed my fingers. "I know," she whispered. "I can feel it." I kissed her forehead. I told her I loved her. I told her that everything that was about to happen came from that love and from nowhere else. She looked at me with slight confusion at the last sentence, but before she could ask, Tracy was adjusting something on the dress, and the moment moved on, the way moments do. I walked back out into the afternoon. Guests were arriving in full now. 180 people filtering into the curved rows of ceremony chairs, dressed beautifully, the women in their summer colors, the men in their linen and their dark suits. I saw faces I had known for 30 years, colleagues from the Bar Association, neighbors from Woodlands Court, members from our church congregation, friends of Patricia's from her book club who still gathered monthly and still set an empty chair for her. I shook hands. I accepted embraces. I answered the question, "How are you holding up?" with a smile that was genuine enough to satisfy. At 3:45, the musicians, a string quartet Simone had hired from the Charleston Symphony, began the prelude. The sound of it moved across the lawn, and the water caught it and gave it back softened. And for a moment, standing at the edge of the ceremony space, I allowed myself to feel the beauty of what this should have been. I allowed myself to grieve, briefly and privately, the uncomplicated version of this afternoon that my daughter deserved. Then I straightened my jacket, touched Patricia's cufflinks, and took my place. The processional began at 4 o'clock exactly. Darius took his position at the altar, flanked by his groomsmen, his back to the water. From where I stood, I could see his face, the practiced composure of a man who had decided that this was the version of himself he had been building toward. The tuxedo was impeccable. The smile was controlled and warm. He looked, I will admit, exactly like the kind of man a father hopes his daughter will find. The bridesmaids walked. Tracy walked. The music shifted and the guests rose. Simone appeared at the end of the aisle on my arm. 200 people turned. A sound moved through the crowd. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sigh, but something in between. The involuntary exhalation of a room encountering something genuinely beautiful. I felt my daughter's hand tighten on my arm. I covered it with my own. We walked. The distance between the entrance and the altar is not long, perhaps 40 feet. But I have walked longer distances in less time and felt less. Every step I took with her was a step towards something I could not undo. Something necessary. Something right. Something that was going to hurt her before it protected her. She was smiling at him. He was smiling at her. I delivered her to the altar. I shook Darius's hand. I looked him in the eye. His grip was firm, and his eyes were full of a confidence so complete, so total, that I understood for the first and last time exactly how certain he was that he had already won. I took my seat in the front row beside Odessa. She reached over without looking at me and placed her hand over mine. Reverend Marcus Elijah Grayson was a man of 62 years, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with a voice that had the natural resonance of someone who had been speaking truth in public spaces for 4 decades. He had married Patricia and me in 1987. He had presided at Patricia's funeral in 2019. There was no one on this earth I trusted more in a room. He opened with scripture. Corinthians. He spoke briefly about the covenant of marriage, its weight, its permanence, its demand for honesty as its foundation. His voice was even and unhurried. His eyes moved across the assembled guests with the practiced authority of a pastor who knows his congregation. Darius stood at the altar with his shoulders back and his chin slightly elevated, the posture of a man receiving an honor he considers his due. And then Reverend Grayson paused. It was not a dramatic pause. It was the kind of pause a man makes when he is about to change the temperature of a room and he wants to be fully present for what he is about to say. He reached into the breast pocket of his vestment robe. He withdrew a document. He unfolded it with deliberate, unhurried care. The guests nearest the front began to notice the rustle of attention moving through the rows. Reverend Grayson cleared his throat once, and then, in a voice that was calm and clear and carried across every chair on that lawn and out across the water beyond, "Before we proceed, I am required by law to read the following. This is a certified court order issued by the Richland County Probate Court. The Honorable Judge Dolores Annette Chambers presiding. The order states, by court order, this union cannot proceed as scheduled, pending resolution of proceedings before the Richland County Probate Court concerning documented evidence of undue influence and financial exploitation with respect to a protected trust beneficiary. This order is effective immediately and is binding upon all parties present." He folded the document. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight and texture. 200 people, not one of them breathing in a way they were aware of. I smiled, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, with the particular relief of a man who has held something heavy for a very long time and has finally been permitted to set it down. I watched Darius Kemp's face in the seconds after those words landed. I watched the sequence move through him the way a tremor moves through a structure before the damage becomes visible. The confusion first, instantaneous and genuine, because the mind rejects information it was not prepared to receive. Then the rapid calculation behind his eyes as the meaning assembled itself. Then the thing underneath the calculation, the fear, clean and cold and unmistakable. He turned to Reverend Grayson. What does that mean? What is this?" Reverend Grayson regarded him with the serene, unflinching patience of a man who has already made his peace with this moment. "It means what it says, son." Darius turned to his attorney. And yes, he had one present. A man I identified in the fourth row on the groom's side, who was now very still. Then he turned to the assembled guests. 200 faces watching him with an expression that is unique to public exposure. Not quite horror, not quite fascination, but the very specific discomfort of witnesses who understand they are watching a man's constructed self come apart in real time. Then he turned to Simone, and that was the hardest thing I saw that afternoon. Not Darius's face, Simon's. The way the beauty of the moment drained out of it, slowly like water from a basin. The way her eyes moved from Reverend Grayson to the document he held to Darius's face, and the way she read what was in that face. Not the words, but the truth beneath the words, with the terrible clarity that arrives when a person realizes that the question they were afraid to ask has been answered. She looked at me. Across the altar, past the roses and the string quartet and 200 witnesses, she found my face. And in her eyes I saw the question. "Daddy, did you know?" I did not look away. I held her gaze with everything I had, and I let my face say what my voice could not say in that moment. "Yes, and I'm sorry, and I love you, and you are going to be all right." Darius took a step toward me. His composure had fractured, but his instinct was to confront, to manage, to perform his way through. "Cornelius." His voice was tight, controlled. The voice of a man who has spent years navigating crises and has not yet accepted that this one is different. This is a misunderstanding. Whatever Wendell told you, whatever documents you think you have, this is between me and Simone, and I would appreciate it if we handled this as a family. I stood. Slowly, I straightened my jacket. I walked a few steps from the front row to the space between the chairs and the altar, where we could speak without the entire world on our backs, though the entire world was still watching. I kept my voice low and entirely even. "Darius, I have a certified court order, a sworn statement from a former business partner you defrauded in Greenville County, bank documentation of an unauthorized access attempt on my daughter's account, using a power of attorney she signed 3 weeks after she met you, a forensic financial analysis prepared by Dr. Phyllis Grant, and a deputy from the Richland County Sheriff's Office seated in the second-to-last row who's prepared to formally serve you with the full filing if necessary. I paused. I have had all of this since February. I gave you every opportunity to be honest. I asked you, the night before last, directly and plainly, if there was anything between us that needed to be said. You looked me in my face and told me we were good. He stared at me. The performance was entirely gone now. What remained underneath was something smaller and more ordinary than I had expected. Not a monster, not a criminal mastermind. Just a man who had made a career of finding the path of least resistance through other people's trust, and who had finally found one that was not, in fact, a path at all. I was going to take care of her, he said. And the frightening thing was that some small part of him may have believed it. You were going to take care of her finances, I said. That is not the same thing. I took one step back. I kept my voice precisely where it had been. I didn't do this to humiliate you. You chose this path the moment you sat at my table and put a pen in my daughter's hand. I am a father and a lawyer and a trustee, and every one of those obligations required me to do exactly what I did. We are done here. I turned. I went to Simone. She had not moved from the altar. Her bridesmaids were around her now, Tracy's hand on her arm, and her face had passed through the first wave of shock and arrived at something rawer and quieter. I stood in front of her. I did not touch her yet, because I was not certain she was ready for that. I found the power of attorney in February, I said quietly. I spent 4 months making certain before I moved. I wanted to be wrong, Simone. I want you to know that. I wanted to be wrong more than I have wanted almost anything. She looked at me for a long time. Her chin was trembling slightly. Her mother's pearl earrings caught the late afternoon light. He asked me to sign it the week of Thanksgiving, she said. Quietly, slowly, as though she were hearing herself say it for the first time. He said it was for estate planning. He said it was what couples do. I know, I said. I didn't read it carefully. I know, she breathed. You should have told me. Yes, I said. I should have. Earlier. I was afraid of what it would do to you before I was certain. That was my mistake, and I own it. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. That same gesture her mother used when she was deciding whether to cry, and she shook her head very slowly. Not at me. At all of it. At the version of the afternoon she had imagined, and the one she was standing inside. Daddy, she finally said. Her voice broke on the second syllable. I opened my arms. She came into them the way she had when she was 7 years old, and the world had been too large and too confusing, and I held my daughter in her wedding dress on the altar she had chosen, with 200 witnesses watching the most private possible grief play out in the most public possible space, and I held her as tightly and as steadily as I knew how. Behind us, I heard Darius's attorney speaking to him in a low voice. I heard Wendell's voice, calm and authoritative, directing the deputy. I heard the guests beginning to murmur, not unkindly, but with the helpless noise of people who have witnessed something they cannot unhear. I heard none of it with the part of myself that mattered. In the weeks that followed, the legal process moved with the efficiency that documentation makes possible. The power of attorney was formally invalidated by the probate court on grounds of undue influence. The court ordered a full forensic review of any and all financial instruments Darius had executed or attempted to execute in connection with Simone, or the trust. The review confirmed the single failed attempt and no successful transfers, which was the finding I had worked 4 months to ensure. Darius's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the broader findings, which Judge Chambers denied in 2 paragraphs. There was discussion, briefly, of criminal referral for the access attempt, but Wendell advised that civil resolution was cleaner, and I agreed. The point was not to imprison him. The point was to close every door. Darius left Columbia within the month. I heard from Wendell, that he had relocated to the Atlanta area, which struck me as either bold or oblivious, given that Angela Fortson of Decatur was presumably still there. I did not follow up. It was not my concern. He tried, in the days after the wedding, to reach Simone through text and then through Tracy, and then, improbably, through one of Odessa's friends who apparently knew someone who knew him. None of these attempts produced a conversation. Simone had her mother's stubbornness, and she applied it now to the question of Doris Kemp with a finality that I recognized as a form of self-protection more powerful than anything I had built in court. Some of the 200 guests had things to say in the aftermath, as people do. A few offered opinions about how I had handled it, that I should have told Simone sooner, that I should have confronted Darius privately, that a wedding ceremony was not the place. I heard these opinions. I considered them. Some of them had merit. The question of timing, of when I should have brought Simone in, is one I have returned to more than once in the quiet of my office, and I have not arrived at an answer that fully satisfies me. I know I was trying to protect her. I know that protection, imperfectly timed, can feel like control. That is a distinction I take seriously. What I do not second-guess is the legal action itself. The documentation was real. The attempt was real. The pattern of his history was real. And the trust, Patricia's trust, built from her life insurance, structured to provide for our daughter's future, was intact. That was the obligation. That was what I was sworn to protect. The hardest conversation came 3 weeks after the wedding. On a Sunday afternoon when Simone came to the house and we sat on the back porch with iced tea and the particular quiet that belongs to two people who have been through something together and are still finding the shape of what comes next. She asked me questions. Real ones, not angry, or not only angry. She asked about the power of attorney and why she hadn't understood what she was signing. She asked about the warning signs she had missed. She asked about the woman in Atlanta. She listened to the answers without interrupting, which is a discipline that takes considerable composure in the best circumstances and considerably more in these. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I wish you had trusted me with it sooner." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I'm not a child." "No," I said. "You are not. You never have been." She looked out at the yard. The oak tree at the edge. The mockingbird, or one very like it, working through its catalog. "I loved him," she said, simply, without drama. A statement of fact, offered not as defense, but as honest record. "I know," I said. "That wasn't the problem." He counted on it. She turned and looked at me with her mother's eyes. "Would you have stopped it? If there had been no power of attorney, if you hadn't found anything, would you have said something?" It was the best question she had ever asked me, and I gave it the time it deserved. "I had concerns," I said finally, "about the pattern, the speed, the way he talked about money. But concerns are not evidence. And you are a grown woman with the right to make her own choices. Without the documentation, I would have held my tongue and stayed close and been ready to help if you needed it." I paused. "That is a harder kind of protection, but it would have been the right one." She thought about that. She nodded once, slowly. "Okay," she said. We sat together until the evening came in off the yard. We did not solve everything. Some of it may not be fully solved for a long time. But we were still at the same table, still drinking from the same pitcher, still watching the same oak tree in the same backyard, where she had learned to ride a bicycle and caught fireflies in June and helped me hang string lights the summer after her mother died because she said the yard needed light. That next spring, Simone reopened her landscape architecture practice after taking a few months for herself. She hired a junior associate named Camille Renee Hightower, a recent graduate of Clemson's architecture program, and they built something small and good and worth being proud of. She took a trip to Portugal with Tracy in April. She called me every Sunday. She came to dinner the first Saturday of every month, and she still made the pound cake. Patricia's pound cake, with the kind of patient devotion that tells you the person making it understands what they're honoring. The trust is intact. The house on Woodlands Court is intact. The name is intact. I sit at my father's desk most mornings with my coffee and the paper, and sometimes I just sit with the quiet. I think about Patricia. I think about what it cost to build this life. Not in money, though it cost that too, but in time and discipline and choices made carefully when no one was watching. I think about my father buying this desk for $40 at an estate sale in 1974 because he believed it would be worth something one day. He was right. On a Sunday in April, I went to the cemetery after church. I stood at Patricia's headstone for a while in the good spring light. The dogwoods doing exactly what dogwoods do in April in South Carolina, which is to say making everything look like it was designed to be beautiful. I told her what happened. The whole of it, beginning to end. I told her about the power of attorney and the 4 months and the court order and Reverend Grayson's voice carrying across the water and Simon's face at the altar and the way we sat on the back porch 3 weeks later and worked our way back to each other. I told her I had worn her cufflinks. I told her that Simone was going to be all right. I don't know if she heard me, but she always did before. Some people confuse patience with blindness. They think because you're quiet, you don't see them moving in the dark. But a man who built his life from nothing, who refinished his own floors and paid off his own mortgage and structured his daughter's trust with his own 2 legal hands, that man always knows when someone is trying to take the foundation. He just chooses the right moment to let them know that he knows. And that moment, chosen correctly, is worth more than any amount of noise. I did not do this for the satisfaction of watching a man fail. I did it because a father's first obligation is not to be liked. It is to protect. And when the protection holds, when the name survives, and the trust survives, and the daughter survives and comes back to the table every first Saturday with a pound cake still warm from the oven, that is not victory. That is what we built this for. What would you have done? Would you have brought Simone in earlier, trusted her with the truth before the evidence was complete? Or did the documentation need to be airtight first? I'd like to know where you stand on that. Drop it in the comments. And if you respect the truth, if you believe that character matters more than money, and that dignity is not negotiable, hit that subscribe button and join this community. I'll be here next week with another one. Thank you for walking this road with me today.